Sup boys, welcome ladies and gentlemen to my new tutorial for the Fire Mage. Now I love the Fire Mage, a lot of people love the Fire Mage, so epic, so cool, so enjoyable to use. I love the Mage in general as a whole. And in this video I want to go through the spec talents, the spec rotation, the spec stat priority and the spec glyphs to give you a general overview on how you want to play the actual Fire Mage. Now the Fire Mage is a little bit more tricky to master than the Frost Mage in my opinion. It's more in depth, but if you can, well, harvest the in-depthness of it, if that's something you could say, it is a more valid spec to use. It's just much more stronger if you are better at it, much more of a skill gap when it comes to the Fire Mage. By all means, that does not mean the Fire Mage is better than the Frost Mage. I love them both, but you know, some people have their preferences. Now, two things, guys, I want to mention before I get into this video is one, in my last guides, I wasn't very good. I was very sloppy. I was very slow, and I didn't really get to the point quick enough, and I was just not very in depth. I wish to make that up to you guys with a much more quality video on the Fire Mages. Furthermore, I also wasn't very helpful as a whole, which is not very good when it comes to a tutorial. So I'm going to try and be more quick, more helpful, and just more valid as a whole. Now, starting off with the talents, you actually want to go with, when it comes to tier 1 talents, you want to go with Blazing Speed. Blazing Speed is much more helpful when it comes to PvP and even PvE, as it increases movements by 150% for 1.5 seconds, which is very helpful. Usually the way to go, in fact almost always the way to go, you want to go with Blazing Speed. For tier 2 talents, you want to go with Flame Glow. Now, Flame Glow, in my opinion, is much more better than the other two. Why? Is because one, it can't be countered, and two, throughout the long run, it absorbs more damage. However, if you are skilled enough, you can use Ice Barrier and Alter Time to really almost get your health back to max. So helpful, Ice Barrier and Alter Time, if used properly. However, you usually want to go with Flame Glow because it's a passive, it's much more easier to control, and as a whole, it's just more easier. For tier 3 talents, I usually go with Frost Draw. However, that can change for many people. Reason why I go for Frost Draw is it's more easier to use in my opinion. It's just more easy to control. It's much less of an actual thing you need to place in the right time, the right place, like Ring of Frost. However, it only targets one person, whilst Ring of Frost can target, incapacitate, my apologies, many people at once if timed properly. Ice Ward is also a valid option. However, I just go with Frost Draw as it's more simple to use in my opinion, and it's just more consistent. For tier 4 talents, I usually go for Cauterize. Cauterize for me is really the way to go, as it's a lifesaver. More to say. Greater Invisibility is very good. However, again, it's not as easy to control as Cauterize is a passive. And Cold Snap is also not as easy to control. Cauterize generally is just a much more easier to control spell and talent as a whole, because it really just acts on its own. For tier 5 talents, you want to be rocking Blast Wave. A Blast Wave is the way to go. It really is. I mean, you can't really go wrong with this. It is the equivalent of the Ice Nova for the Frost Mages. It really is the equivalent, and it is your hard-hitting spell when it comes to mages. It is so useful, it is so helpful, and it hits like a truck, a proper truck. For your tier 6 talents, you want to go with Incanter's Flow. Now, Incanter's Flow is again one of the abilities that, well, Incanter's Flow is what you want to use, basically. It's always what you want to use. Rune of Power and Mirror Image are just not as effective. Rune of Power, when it comes to PvE and PvP, you need to be very static, you need to really stand still when it comes to it. And the problem with that is, obviously, now in new PvE raids, and even always in PvP fights, you need to be moving around as quick as you can. Now, what's the problem with that, you ask? Well, think about it. Rune of Power, you need to place a Rune of Power down, you need to stand on it. Mirror Image is just not as helpful, it's just not as useful as Incanter's Flow. As Incanter's Flow is something that's constant, it's consistent also, and it's just so much more helpful to use, and it really helps with DPS. And finally, for your tier 7 talents, you want to go with Meteor. Now this can change throughout PvE or PvP. Usually I see the PvEers going with Kindling. Kindling is very helpful, it's very strong, and it just does a lot. It basically decreases your cooldown on combustion every time your, well, Firebolt, Frostbite, Firebolt, Pyroblast, and Inferno Blast critically strike, which is obviously very helpful when it comes to PvE. However, PvP, Meteor is usually the way to go, as it's, well, as a whole, easier to control. It is easier to control. I know that's all I've really been saying, but that's what you want to get. If you can't find something easy to control, then you're not gonna play well with it. Meteor is easy to cast. And it just hits like a truck. It really is very powerful, and it fits into the current rotation for the Fire Mage very well. And for glyphs, usually what I go for is one major glyph, Glyph of Dragon's Breath. Now, Glyph of Dragon's Breath increases the damage done by Dragon's Breath by 100%. More DPS, an easier time for you. It's just so much more useful. It's very helpful to use. My second major glyph is Glyph of Regenerative Ice. Sorry, that's a tongue twister. It's obviously much more helpful. It regenerates your health while you're in Ice Block mode, which is obviously very helpful. It basically saves your life. And next, I usually go with Polymorph. Polymorph is very helpful for me when it comes to PvP mostly. Obviously, when it comes to PvE, this is almost useless. But when it comes to PvP, it's very helpful. When it comes to when it comes to PvE, sometimes I'd go for Combustion. If not, I'd probably go with Inferno Blast. So yeah, that's really it. For stat priority, you really want to go for major. When it comes to major stats, you really want to go for intellect. That's the way to go. When it comes to you're a ranged DPS, caster ranged DPS. So usually it's intellect you really want to go for. But when it comes to the, well, minor stats, I guess, there's a massive change. Usually what you really want to go for is critical strike. Critical strike, I mean, fire mages just really leech off critical strike, and it's just such a beauty. Critical strike, higher critical strike equals better play. Honestly, that's the way you usually want to go when coming into a Fire Mage. You also want to go for some versatility. Versatility is also very helpful. Very easy to use. Not very easy to use when I'm on my own. But versatility is very helpful to the actual spec and rotation. And another one, these are the three majors almost. Another one you really want to go for is obviously haste. Increases cast time. More haste you have, the quicker you cast. Obviously that's a no-brainer. It's just more helpful. It might increase it by a minor amount. It's just still much more helpful as a whole. Alright guys, now moving on to the rotation. Now the rotation is a little bit complex when it comes to the Fire Mage. It's not as simple as the Frost Mage, as the Frost Mage only really had one rotation to go out. However, when it comes to Fire Mages, it can actually be played in many different ways. Well, not many, but different ways as a whole. There is a difficulty gap almost. Some ways are easier to play than others, but the harder ways to play are usually the best ways to play. By that I mean you sometimes, when it comes to the harder rotations, you want to start off with almost three. What you usually want to do is you want to start off with 3 Scorches. What that does is it gives you, if I can just show you, it gives you stacks of ignition, and once you get 3 stacks of ignition, it makes your next firebolt cast quicker. Obviously that means more distribution of damage, which equals just a better overall experience when it comes to damage. Another way you could just go with it is just, fire your firebolts, fish for procs, fish for pyroblast procs, activate as much as you can, and from time to time use your other moves, which is much more simpler. Sorry, that wasn't really proper grammar. Much more simpler, however, it's not as effective if I'm entirely honest. It's still a lot more simpler. I might be going through both of these, but I mean one of them is very simple. There's not much to say about it, which is just basically you try to cast your fire bolts, what you're basically doing is fishing for pyroblast procs, and then you activate your pyroblast as much as you can. But for my rotation, I'm going to go in a little bit more complexity, and it's a little bit more challenging at the same time. So what I usually start off with is when I'm pulling is I activate 3 scorches, sometimes more, sometimes 5, try and get as much procs. Go with my fire bolt, activate my dragon's breath, activate scorch, and use your pyroblast procs. My apologies. So basically, to run that down, I kind of got confused in the middle of it as to what the fuck I was doing. But to run that down, basically you want to start with as much scorches as you can. Let's get as much stacks of these as we can, and we also want to get as much procs as we can. Now we have 3 stacks. Our firebolt casts quicker. We want to go with our dragon's breath next. We want to activate our pyroblast, and then we want to go with our infernal blast. And after that, what you really want to do is you want to activate your blast waves, and then again go for your scorches, fish for procs when it comes to your pyroblast, and that's how you do it. And once you get 3 stacks of your ignition, obviously your next firebolt will cast quicker. You know, that's good. So that's what you basically want to do. As a whole, you'll be getting much more decent DPS. If you go for, and you want to activate combustion whenever you can, if you go for meteor, what you want to do is you want to include that into your rotation. So what you want to do is you want to activate with 3 scorches. Kind of fucked up there, so I'm re-editing it. You want to activate with 3 scorches, right? Or 5 scorches. Usually what I do is 5 scorches, fish out for procs, try and actually get my procs. I haven't got any procs currently, which is quite disappointing. Just fishing for procs, getting that proc. Once I get that proc, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my dragon's breath. I'm going to use my actual meteor. Going to use my pyroblast, and then I'm going to activate my firebolt, use my pyroblast again, and then use my infernal blast, and use my blast waves. And then really I repeat the process. Get all that, activate my dragon's breath, activate my firebolt, my accelerated firebolt, use my pyroblast, go back to my scorches, try and get as much as I can, and use my pyroblast again. Use my infernal blast to spread them dots. So that's basically how you want to play. And once you get 3 stacks, quicker fire bolts, just quicker play as a whole. Usually I can get like around 31k damage with the Fire Mage. You can definitely get more. If you're more talented, you can definitely get more. So you want to just fish for procs, and once you, it's a good idea to just do that. Go for your infernal blast, use your thing, use your meteor, use your infernal blast, spread it, and use your combustion there, use that, use my scorches, use as much scorches as you can, use my firebolt, use my infernal breath, use my pyroblast. That's really how you want to go with it. You can get a lot of DPS down if you actually do this. It doesn't necessarily need to be in this fixed order. Doesn't necessarily need to be on it, but that's usually the order I go with. Again, there is multiple ways to really actually play the Fire Mage, my mistake. And all of it is really solid. The Fire Mage is a very enjoyable spec. Once you get used to it, you can deal 31k damage, no problem. It's much more enjoyable. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Leave any suggestions in the comment sections below, you silly fuckers, and see you next time.